Hello, good afternoon. Dobar dan, dobrodošli u novu video lekciju na kanalu How to Start, znači kako da počnemo. Početci su uvijek najteži kad je u pitanju bilo šta drugo, pa i učenje jezika. Dakle, ja vam pomažem da vam ti početci budu koliko toliko podnošljiviji. Danas vežbamo engleski na moj način i krećemo odmah. Prva rečenica. On živi u, a ti gdje ti živiš? On živi u, gdje god? U Londonu. He lives in London or Boston, I don't know, I'm not sure. He lives in London. And you? What about you? And you? Gdje ti živiš? Where do you live? He lives in London. And you? Where do you live? Where do you live? Ne zaboravite na pomoćni glagol. Gdje ti živiš? Gdje ti živiš? Kod nas 3 riječi. Sjetite se, kad postavljate pitanje u engleskom, morate imati reč viška, a to je upravo taj pomoćni glagol, u ovom slučaju do ili does. Dakle, gdje ti živiš? 3 riječi. Na engleskom, where do you live? 4 riječi. Dakle, i to je ta 4. višak kod nas, ali kod njih neophodna, pomoćni glagol. Where do you live? He lives in London. And you? Where do you live? Ok. Probamo sa sljedećom. Moj prijatelj često ide u bioskop. My friend often goes to the cinema. My friend often goes to the cinema. He often goes to the cinema. He lives in London and he often goes to the cinema. Treće lice, he, nastavak S na glagol. He lives in London and he often goes to the cinema. And you? Da li ti često ideš u bioskop? Da li? To da li će u ovom slučaju biti do you. Dakle, do you often go to the cinema? Do you often go to the cinema? He often goes to the cinema. And you? Do you often go to the cinema? Or gdje ti često ideš? Postavljam pitanje. Kod nas 4 riječi. Gdje ti često ideš? U engleskom 5. Je li tako? Where do you often go? Gdje ti često ideš? Where do you often go? Do you often go to the cinema? Or maybe to the theater? Or do you go running? Do you go shopping? Or do you just stay at home? Maybe you go nowhere. Možda ne ideš nikuda. Maybe you just stay at home. Možda ostaješ kod kuće. Where do you often go? Okay. Number 3. For example, he, my friend, he lives in London and he often goes to the cinema and he studies English. He studies English twice a week. So he lives in London, he often goes to the cinema, and he studies English twice a week. He studies English twice a week. And you? Koliko često ti učiš nemački? 5 riječi. Znači imat ćemo 6. How often do you study English? How often do you study English? How often do you study English? Do you study English twice a week? Or maybe 3 times a week? Maybe 4 times a week? Maybe 5 times a week? Maybe 7 times a week? Maybe you study English every day. We can also ask, for example, koliko često, to smo rekli, how often, and we can maybe ask koliko puta, nedeljno, how, šta mislite, much ili many? Ako hoću da kažem koliko puta nedeljno, 2, 3, 5, 6. Dakle, kad imate u odgovoru neki broj, pitamo sa many, sa brojevom. Znači, how many times. Ili gledajte po ovome, ako možemo na tu imenicu koja ide za how many da stavimo s, how many books, how many times, how many pencils, how many desks, onda je brojevo, how many. So, how many times a week? I to nam je sve upitna reč. Koliko puta nedeljno? How many times a week? Koliko puta nedeljno? I sad treba da nastavim. Ti učiš engleski. Znači, neće biti ti učiš engleski, nego će biti još jedna, da tako reč, viška, to je do. How many times a week do you study English? Have to change language. Stavno kucam pogrešno. Ok. So, how many times a week? To je sve upitna reč. Onda idemo. Do you study English? How many times a week do you study English? Twice a week? 3 times a week? Or more? Okay. So, my friend, he lives in London. He goes to the cinema very often. And he studies English twice a week. On želi da kupi auto. He wants to buy a car, a new car. He wants to buy a new car. He wants to buy a new car. And you? And you? Do you want to buy a car? Da li ti želiš da kupiš auto? Do you want to buy a car? Do you want to buy a car? Or maybe you want to buy something else. So, šta ti želiš da kupiš? 5 reči kod nas. Šta ti želiš da kupiš? U engleskom 6. What? Pa ispred šta ti, mi kažemo what do you, i već smo dodali tu jedno do viška, sad idemo da ređamo. Znači šta ti želiš, what do you want, da kupiš, to buy. What do you want to buy? My friend, he wants to buy a new car. And what about you? Do you want to buy a new car? What do you want to buy? What do you want to buy? Maybe you don't want to buy a car. Maybe you want to buy a house. Ok. On ima stari auto. He has an old car. He has an old car and he wants to buy a new car. He has an old car. He has an old car. And you? Kakav auto ti imaš? Kakav auto? E sad to kakav ćemo prevesti sa koju vrstu. What kind? What kind of a car? What kind of a car? To nam je kakav auto. To nam je what kind of a car. E sad mi treba da kažemo ti imaš, 2 reči, ali ćemo imati još jednu dodatu, tako do. What kind of a car do you have? What kind of, kakvu vrstu, kakav auto imaš ti? What kind of a car do you have? Do you have an old car Or do you have a new car? An old car, an old car, a new car. Dakle, ovdje imamo N, a ne E, zbog toga što je ovdje iza reč koja počinje na vokal. An old car. A ovdje imamo E, pa consonant, a new car. So, do you have an old car or do you maybe have a new car? And what kind of a car do you have? And what kind of a car do you want to buy? Kakav želiš da kupiš? So my friend, he lives in London. He often goes to the cinema. He studies English twice a week. He wants to buy a new car because he has an old car. He has an old car. He works in a shop. He works in a shop. Radi u nekoj prodavnici. He works in a shop. And you? Gde ti radiš? Where do you work? He works in a shop. And you, what about you? Where do you work? Do you work in a shop as well? Znači, da li ti radiš u prodavnici? Do you work in a shop as well? As well, također. Do you work in a shop as well? Do you work in a shop or somewhere else? My friend, he works in a shop. He works in a shop and he has an old car and he wants to buy a new car. And he studies English really hard, twice a week. And he often goes to the cinema. He likes going to the cinema. He likes going to the cinema. He often goes to the cinema. And he lives in London now. He lives in London now. But he doesn't come from England. He doesn't come from London. So he comes from, my friend, he actually comes from Spain. He comes from Spain. And you? Where do you come from? So my friend, he comes from Spain. And you? Where do you come from? Do you come from England? Do you come from Spain? Or from some other country? Where do you come from? Odakle ti dolaziš? Where do you come from? My friend comes from Spain. So he speaks Spanish. He speaks Spanish. His mother tongue is Spanish. But now he lives in London and he speaks English. At least he is trying to. Pokušava, he is trying to. He studies English twice a week and he works in a shop and he wants to buy a new car. And he comes from Spain. He is from Spain. He comes from Spain. And you, what about you? Where do you come from? Where do you come from? He goes to Spain once a year. He goes to Spain once a year. On ide u Španiju jednom godišnje. He goes or he visits his family. He visits his family in Spain once a year in summer. Summer. He goes to Spain. He visits his family in Spain. His family is in Spain, so he visits them. He goes to Spain once a year in summer usually. Usually in summer. Obično leti, posjećuje porodicu u Španiji jednom godišnje. Ili ide u Španiju jednom godišnje. So what about you? Koliko često ti posjećuješ svoju porodicu? How often do you visit your family? Koliko često ti posjećuješ svoju porodicu? 6, znači moramo da imamo 7. How often do you visit your family? 7, znači imamo ovo do, da ne zaboravimo. So, how often do you visit your family? How often does he visit his family? He visits his family once a year. And how often do you visit your family? Once or maybe twice a year, or maybe often, or maybe you live with your family, so you see them every day. Okay. He has a girlfriend. She is from London. She doesn't speak Spanish. So he has to speak only English with her. And sometimes it is very difficult for him. So, he has a girlfriend. On ima devojku. He has a girlfriend. She's from London. And she doesn't speak Spanish. She doesn't speak Spanish. So, he has to speak only English with her. Dakle, ona ne govori španski. I on mora. He has to. On mora da govori samo na engleskom sa njom. He has to speak only English. In English. With her. Sometimes, ponekad, it is very difficult for him. Ponekad je to veoma teško za njega. Sometimes it is very difficult for him. Difficult. Teško. So, what about you? Do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Da li ti imaš devojku? Do you have a girlfriend? Da li ona govori? Does she speak Spanish or English? Or we can ask koji jezik ona govori. What language does she speak? Dakle, ne zaboravimo da brojimo koji jezik ona govori, 4 riječi, na engleskom 5. What language does she speak? What language does she speak? Does she speak Spanish or English? And he has to speak only English with her. He has to. Mora. He has to. Da li ti moraš da govoriš na engleskom? Do you have to speak English or in English? Do you have to speak in English, or maybe you can speak in some other language? Do you have to speak English? Do you have to? Sometimes it is difficult for him. Is it difficult for you as well? Da li je tebi teško? Is it difficult for you when you have to speak in English? Is it difficult for you when you have to say something in English? Da li je teško kad treba da pričaš na engleskom? It can be difficult, I know, može biti teško. Ali, samo sa vežbom se sve postiže. Dobro, lepo smo vežbali danas, vidimo se u narednom klipu. Goodbye.